Hello and welcome to Ashway News. So today we're discussing Ethiopia and how a recent election may pave the way for a escalation in the myriad conflicts the country is facing, both internal and external. So we're going to quickly go over the parliamentary elections, do a brief background on Ethiopian politics, then look at Abiy Ahmed's leadership so far, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. We're going to look at then the internal conflicts and then the external conflicts. Basically, with the aim of understanding what on earth is going on here. All kinds of different conflicts, all kinds of different militant groups, and we're going to go into all of them. So, the election. Abiy Ahmed's Prosperity Party, the ruling party of Ethiopia, was widely expected to dominate, and as expected, 90% of available seats were won. So, that's pretty indicative of just how democratic this election really was. Opposition groups accused the government of stymieing their activities, opposition leaders were arrested, all kinds of things. So it was more a formality than a meaningful competitive election. Furthermore, given the numerous areas of Ethiopia that are currently seeing conflicts and instability, not all regions of the country were able to vote. Most notably, if you look at the regions here, Tigray region, which is currently the most unstable, was completely excluded from the vote, and many areas of the Amhara region, which is also seeing instability, were excluded as well. So it was A, not free and fair, and B, it was also not representative of the entire country, which obviously raises questions about the legitimacy of it from multiple angles. Nevertheless, 90% sweep does give Abiy Ahmed a strong mandate. That's the big question. He has a strong mandate now. He can point to this election result in order to justify taking executive action in any way that he sees fit. So, brief background. The TPLF, which is the party from Tigray region here, ruled Ethiopia from 1991 to 2018. Before that, it was the Amharas who controlled it for a while. So often what you're seeing in Ethiopia's history is that these regions, which represent ethnicities, sort of have competed for who takes the central government. So it was the Amhara, then for 2 decades it was the Tigray, 3 decades almost. During their rule, the Tigray actively oppressed the Amhara and Oromo peoples in order to maintain their authority. So many of the leaders of the government, many of the ambassadors, many of the diplomats were Tigrayans. And that's also why, if you have been familiar with Ethiopia for several years now, anything in the sort of 2000s, 2010s, that you would have seen from Ethiopia would have been seen from a Tigray lens. So it would have been Tigray ambassadors, it would have been Tigray spokespeople, it would have been Tigray politicians. So they dominated the country politically, and also they dominated the country's foreign policy. The most relevant part of this history lesson here is the war with Eritrea, which was from 1998 to 2000. This was basically Eritrea had won independence in the early 90s, and since then relations have been very hostile, notably also because Eritrea's independence cut off Ethiopia's access to the sea. If we see here on Google Maps, Eritrea completely cuts off any Ethiopian access to the sea, and so Ethiopia is now one of the largest landlocked countries in the world, and is reliant on shipping stuff largely through Djibouti. This is going to be very, very relevant later. But Ethiopia and Eritrea fought 2-year-long civil war, and then had 2 decades of basically frozen conflict, as it was unresolved. It sort of was a hostile stalemate, and this was one of the longest running frozen conflicts in the world. The TPLF towards the end of the 2010s grew increasingly unpopular, especially through its favoritism to the Tigray minority, and eventually it saw mass protests break out that in 2018 led to the government deciding to step back and announce Abiy Ahmed as the successor to the TPLF regime. So Abiy Ahmed is an ethnic Oromo, who also has Muslim roots, so was seen as sort of a uniting figure. Abiy Ahmed obviously being part Arabic-derived, part African-derived name. So he is from Oromia, but also has roots in the sort of Islamic side of Ethiopia, which makes up a significant portion of the population. Under his rule, he set about centralizing the fractured political system. So before that, you had all these different ethnic regions competing for influence. He tried to create a unified, centralized government. So he did this by creating the Prosperity Party, which is the party that just dominated the elections. And this led to significant success. These centralization efforts, the efforts to create a more stable and centralized and functional government, his efforts to open up to the world, all led to an economic boom. This was also the reason why he dominated these elections. I mean, one of the reasons. It was seen as an economic miracle that he achieved. He has had growth of around 10% per year. So an extremely successful economy, one of the fastest growing in Africa, one of the fastest growing in the world. He also opened the country up and was less repressive. He eased many restrictions on freedoms, including freedom of speech and freedom of press. So he was widely regarded as this reformer, as this economically competent leader, and as someone who was opening the country up, and a great sort of, not democratic, but liberal success story. He also notably sought peace with Eritrea, trying to end that 2-decade-long civil war. And these efforts gained him the Nobel Peace Prize. And they were successful. He managed to reach an agreement with Eritrea. They managed to reopen the borders, which had been closed for 2 decades. So he won the Nobel Peace Prize for these efforts. However, this rosy image did not last. Conflict escalated with the TPLF, leading to an extraordinarily brutal war. So the TPLF being the party of the Tigray region, which formerly dominated the country, they were unhappy with his efforts to centralize the government under the Prosperity Party, and so they broke away, they stopped cooperating, and Ethiopia fought a war against them in order to reintegrate the region into the country. The war originally went very poorly for Ethiopia, with the Tigrayans managing to get really far down, including nearing Addis Ababa. But eventually the government managed to push them back, including especially through the use of drones. They imported drones from numerous countries, including most notably Turkey, and managed to push the rebels back. Now, as they advanced into Tigray region, Ethiopian government forces have been accused of committing widespread atrocities, rape used as a weapon of war extensively, the mass killing of civilians, and possibly most destructively, aid was blockaded to the region, and several 100,000 people, an estimated 600,000 people died due to the starvation and mass killing campaigns of the Ethiopian government. Now, of course, the rebels also committed atrocities. They were also implicated in atrocities against civilians. But of particular relevance here is the scale of the violence unleashed by the Ethiopian government. Notably, the ethnic dimension of the war saw Afar and Amhara militias join in the government efforts. So these are sort of local militias of local youths and gangs taking up arms in order to help fight against the TPLF. This is going to become very relevant later. So the Amhara and Afar militias joined the government. The Oromo militias, so this is here in the Oromo region, they had already existed previously, and they did not join the government. They joined the TPLF because the Oromos have long felt marginalized, and their region is underinvested in, and they are politically underrepresented. And despite Abiy Ahmed being Oromo, these accusations continue. So they do not see him as ushering in equality for the Oromo people. As such, the Oromo Liberation Army, a collection of rebel groups under a sort of a loose-ish umbrella, joined the TPLF in the fight, which was not hugely militarily relevant, but will be relevant later as we look more into the sort of internal fault lines in the country. The war ended in the Pretoria Peace Agreement after 2 years. The agreement successfully managed to end the war and paused the fighting and led to the borders reopening and stuff. However, it had built-in flaws. So Eritrea, which had fought alongside the government against the TPLF and occupied some areas of northern Tigray, were not mentioned in the agreement. So the Eritrean allies of the government were left out, so their status was unclear. Then there is here, so you can see this is the western region of the Tigray province. They were left out. They were captured by the Amhara militias. Amhara has long claimed Western Tigray as their own. They call it Volkite. But yes, this area was captured by the Amhara militias, and part of the Pretoria Agreement was that it would be handed back to the Tigray region. So this has a built-in fault line, with the Amharas obviously not going to be happy about this territory that they've captured, that they also claim as theirs, being surrendered back to their former enemies in the TPLF. So Eritrea not mentioned in the agreement, territorial concessions that are going to make these Amhara groups unhappy. There were numerous built-in flaws to the agreement. So now that brings us to the internal conflicts. So as we already mentioned, several ethnic armed militias rose up to fight against the TPLF on the side of the government. Now the government, obviously, Abiy Ahmed, his whole political project hinges on the centralization, right? Centralizing power in a federal government rather than having a bunch of competing ethnic parties and ethnic militias vying for control of the state. So the government sought to disband and federalize all of these ethnic armed militias from the war. This led to significant discontent, especially in the Amhara region. There were riots. This was seen as an effort to disenfranchise them and to centralize control to their disadvantage. Furthermore, in order to fulfill the Pretoria Agreement, the government worked to hand this area back, Volkite or Western Tigray, to the TPLF. This was obviously seen as a betrayal by the Amharas who fought, the Fano militias, which is the umbrella term for the sort of semi-organized youth groups of the Amhara region that rose up to fight. So the effort to disarm the Amhara militias and the effort to hand Western Tigray back to the TPLF, back to the Tigray government, was seen as a betrayal and led to an insurgency breaking out in the Amhara region. That's sort of loosely mapped here, or also here in the sort of shaded area. All of these areas have seen a sort of Amhara resistance. Amhara obviously make up over 30 million people. So Tigray is around 6 million. So the Amhara is a much, much larger percentage of the country and much greater chance of meaningful instability and meaningful state collapse being caused by any kind of escalating instability there. So Amhara uprising due to the handing back of Western Tigray, or the attempt to hand back Western Tigray, and the attempt to disband these Amhara militias, the Fano groups. Then in the Oromo region, again, the OLA continue their activities. It's much more low-level insurgency than the Amhara Fano uprising, but nevertheless a constant needle in the side of the government. And yeah, so here you then have the broad map. You have the instability in the Amhara region. You have the instability here in the Tigray region. This is the disputed Western Tigray region that is claimed by the Amharas. And then this sort of broad area of activity of the OLA, the Oromo Liberation Army here. Although again, the Oromo Liberation Army is the least salient of these conflicts. So these are the three main sort of arenas of internal discord in Tigray, Amhara, and Oromia. So the most notable, of course, being Tigray. So let's zoom in a bit on that. The Tigray region agreed to have an interim government controlled by the central government in Addis Ababa in order to end the war. Now, last month the TPLF withdrew from that. So in the early months of 2026, the TPLF withdrew from that and basically kicked out the interim government. They have recaptured the major cities of the region, in Mekelle most notably, the regional capital, and have taken most of the Tigray region that is not occupied by the Fano, the ethnic Amhara militias. So they have kicked out the interim government. They have withdrawn from the Pretoria Agreement, and they are now reportedly going door to door mobilizing people, including children. So they have enacted quite draconian, quite strict mobilization laws, and are now basically mobilizing everyone. So this is seen as a preparation for war. This is a quite open rebellion against the government, and so this is a very open, fractured line. And as mentioned before, Eritrea has links to the TPLF. It's known to be cooperating with them. It's known to be sending them arms. So not only is the TPLF seemingly gearing up for war, it seems likely that Eritrea would also be dragged into any such reemergence of conflict. Reports have indicated that the TPLF has been massing troops on its border with the Ethiopian federal government-like areas in the Amhara region and the Afar region. So they're massing troops, the government is massing troops, notably also Eritrea has been massing troops on the border, and Ethiopia has been massing troops on its border with Eritrea. So massive tinderbox, everyone's massing troops, everyone's mobilizing. It's seen as a very, very tense tinderbox, like it's the chance of conflict really escalating here seems pretty high. So that's the internal stuff. You have the internally, you have the TPLF, the most salient risk factor, which would potentially draw Eritrea in. You have this Amhara insurgency, which is largely rural, but has also been affecting major cities, including the regional capital, Bahadar. And the OLA, which is a much more low-level insurgency, but nevertheless a persistent thorn in the side of the government. And again, the Amhara and Oromo, very large regions, and if these insurgencies escalate, if, for instance, the government cracks down aggressively and this leads to a more general uprising and larger recruitment numbers, these could be real threats to the survival of the state. Now, externally, so we've gone through internally these three major fault lines, Tigray, Amhara, and Oromia. Let's go through external. So Abiy Ahmed has been talking again about seizing access to a port. So as we discussed before, Ethiopia lost access to the sea when Eritrea seceded, and since then has been one of the principal causes for the Ethiopian government to regain sea access. They're not okay with just transporting their goods through Djibouti. They want to meaningfully create their hold their own port. Notably, Abiy Ahmed has become increasingly insistent on this and has stated that a country of over 100 million people cannot be locked in a geographic prison, is the word he used. So very clear, very stark statements. He wants a port. So how has he been going about this? First of all, Somaliland. He has talked with the Somaliland government, which is a breakaway state within within Somalia, about acquiring access to a port in the region in exchange for recognizing Somaliland's independence. This led to a massive diplomatic conflict and saw regional tensions really escalate. So Egypt, which is already hostile with Ethiopia because of the dam project, the damming the Nile. Egypt, Turkey notably, all came to back Somalia and actually deployed forces to Somalia in an evident threat to Somaliland's efforts to pursue independence. So Ethiopia is sort of looking to support the breakaway state there. After Turkish mediation, Ethiopia sort of backed off, but still pretty clear where they stand on this. So if they could, they would. And the Somaliland issue, while calmed down now, is very much not over. Now, also, if you see here, striped in yellow, Ethiopia has also tried to claim this area of Eritrea, including the port of Assab. which obviously used to be Ethiopia before Eritrea seceded. So that is another effort by Ethiopia to seize a port. So it's looking around the region. It's basically shopping, right? It's looking between Somalia, between Eritrea, which country would have the best chance of trying to of seizing a port. And Egypt, obviously, very, very tense with Ethiopia due to the Grand Renaissance Dam, which is seen by Egypt as a major threat to its water supplies. So Egypt is looking to back Eritrea and Somalia in stopping these Ethiopian efforts to seize a port. So huge regional tension there. Now, Ethiopia seems to be increasingly aligning itself in the anti-status quo front. So what does that mean? Status quo front. Here's a map from Clement Molin. The status quo front would be the sort of countries that want to maintain the current regional order in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Somalia. These are countries that do not want major changes to the borders and makeup of the region. Ethiopia now has been aligning increasingly with the UAE and Israel, which are seeking to change their current order of the region. So the breakaway state of Somaliland by supporting that, by supporting the invasion of Eritrea. And Ethiopia has also been aligning increasingly with the RSF, which is a militia that is also backed by the UAE, fighting against the Sudanese government. So this also brings the country into huge hostilities with Sudan, which you can see here. The RSF sort of control this area in Darfur in the east, while the Sudanese government controls this sort of central Nile region. And currently, the RSF are pushing west, notably into El Obeid over here. So the conflict in Sudan, while the RSF has been pushed out of the capital region, is escalating in these sort of more western regions that the RSF is dominant in. And as the RSF continues its advance on El Obeid and in this area, tensions are rising as Ethiopia's role in supporting the RSF seems increasingly clear. So that and the Somaliland issue really place Ethiopia in this anti-status quo bracket of the UAE, Israel, also eastern Libya here, and the Khalifa Haftar, while also supporting the RSF. So very much anti-status quo alignment. Interestingly, the US has in recent months sought to reset relations with Ethiopia and also even looked at relations with Somaliland. So it seems like the US increasingly under Trump may even be sort of joining the anti-status quo powers, at least flirting with them in a way that is quite unique because the US obviously used to see its role as the global policeman and would have been against the against efforts to overturn regional status quos as they are here. So this is a huge tinderbox again. Ethiopia massed troops on their border with Eritrea, Somalia getting support from Egypt and Turkey. There's lots of troops built up. The TPLF obviously here mobilizing troops. Fano insurgency continues to be salient. Oromo not marked here as it's obviously not as relevant. So huge regional tensions. A lot of stuff going on here, obviously, but I think what's most notable to remember is just that Ethiopia is in the anti-status quo bloc. Ethiopia is in the bloc that is seeking to change the borders, seeking to disrupt the current status quo alongside the UAE, Israel, Haftar, and the RSF. So, summary. Domestic and regional tensions are mounting. There are numerous fault lines both within the country and with its neighbours. And what's more notable here is that Abiy Ahmed's parliamentary win, this landslide election victory of 90% of the vote, may give him the mandate to escalate. It may give him a feeling of confidence that he can point to this as a gesture of support from the people despite it not really being a democratic election, but a gesture of support nonetheless that can allow him to finally take care of these myriad security challenges once and for all. So these notable ones here, it may see him first of all begin to try to crack down on these Amhara and Oromo uprisings, though these would be less of a priority than obviously the TPLF, which have essentially seized control of the most of the Tigray region, including the major cities. So that seems to be a distinct possibility that this election result is going to see him escalate in those in the Tigray region, and also potentially seek to take out this Amhara and Oromo insurgencies. Now, obviously, the risk of that is a fragmentation of Ethiopia, right? Because if he, in these campaigns, is seen as brutalizing these ethnic groups, is seen as brutalizing Amhara, is seen as brutalizing the Tigray, this can further stoke ethnic nationalism and a desire to secede from Ethiopia, and so it could really see like a fragmentation of the state itself if campaigns are launched and ethnic groups are seen themselves as like oppressed and aggrieved and attacked by the Ethiopian government itself. Now, the mobilization of the Tigrayans by the TPLF is possibly the most concerning recent sign. Really, mass mobilization going door to door is not something that you do unless you see a real likelihood of armed conflict in the imminent future. And as discussed, a war with the TPLF has a high chance of dragging Eritrea in. So this is the one to watch. The Amhara and Oromo insurgencies are. There's a good chance that he may seek to escalate to pacify those movements, but really the Tigray region with their allies in Eritrea are the most significant and most worrisome sign in recent months. In the broader region, as discussed, the Sudan tensions are the most significant, with Sudan increasingly angry at Ethiopia's seemingly direct support for the RSF, and the Sudanese armed forces are these. There are indications that they are basically looking to support the Fano and the TPLF militias. So they're sort of retaliating for Ethiopia's support for the RSF with providing support for the Fano and the TPLF. So that's a huge regional dynamic that provides a significant risk of escalation. Particularly as, again, the RSF is advancing. Well, I have a map here. Yeah, the RSF, which already controls this sort of western region of the country in Darfur, is continuing to march eastwards. Is continuing, and now El Obeid is the next big city that is looking like it's going to come under siege in coming weeks. So that's again like another risk of like a massive civilian campaign of atrocities against the civilian population there, as was seen in El Fasher over here. And as that escalates, and as that again moves closer to this sort of central Nile region of Sudan, tensions with Ethiopia can build. Furthermore, Ethiopia is continuing to look at its neighbors in Somaliland and in Eritrea for a port. And again, the mandate, he's in a better position now than ever to try to pursue a military solution to Ethiopia's landlocked status. So, internal and external threats are rising, and this 90% wipeout provides a significant backwind for him to potentially pursue an aggressive military campaign against threats, both internal and external. Thank you very much for watching. If you got this far, please subscribe, please like, and drop a comment if there's anything you think I missed. See you next week.